Thanks. Happy Father's Day. Just to your fathers. I mean, not to everybody else. I take it back if it wasn't intended for you. So, today I want to talk about a lesson learned from Dad. All right? You guys know my dad, right? Okay. My dad, he fixes everything, does everything, knows everything about everything. If you ask Ella, he can fix anything out of wood. So like if anything breaks, it's got to be fixed out of wood. But as we were growing up, Dad's big into the yard work stuff, and I'm not. Like you've heard me talk about killing my grass. Like I need one of those fertilizer spreaders with some rock salt. That'd be just fine. I'm not a big green thumb. I don't like that kind of stuff. But growing up, man, Dad had trees and flowers and plants and grass. And, you know, I have this theory now that I have kids that it was just to keep the kids busy. Like slave labor or no idle hands type thing. So as we were growing up, we learned a lot about planting stuff and watering stuff and fertilizing stuff and mowing stuff and weed eating stuff and trimming stuff. Here's a story for you. Now, Dad, you'll probably remember this, but when we were little, because Dad had 3 kids and not a lot of money, we didn't have a weed eater. So we did have scissors and 3 kids. And that place was trimmed up. I mean, trimmed up. So if you don't have a weed eater, you can't afford a weed eater, I don't understand. But anybody's got scissors and kids. And the two are a great combination for trimming your place up. So you can always do that. That's an idea for you. Lessons learned from Dad. When we were raising trees, we couldn't afford big trees, so we bought little trees and planted them, and then they grew up to be big trees. But one thing Dad taught us about was pruning trees, trimming trees. Now, yesterday, I was out trimming trees, and I was sharing with Celia that my dad had taught me about trimming trees. Now, here's the rule for trimming trees. You never feed anything you're not going to keep. That's a rule for trimming trees. Dad's taught us that. I've heard that a million times my whole life. You never feed anything you're not going to keep. That's a good theory, like puppies, cats, kids. You never feed anything you're not going to keep. This was Dad's theory when it came to trimming trees. And I was like, whatever, just which branch do I cut off? Let's just get simple. But what we see after his trees grow is his trees are beautiful. When they're grown, they're beautiful. And it's because when they're small and as they grow, all of the branches that are going to be a problem in the future get cut off when they're little. And so as he's shaping and forming the tree, as it's growing, he's not feeding anything that he's not going to keep. Well, what happens then is all of the nourishment and all the water and all the things for the tree to grow big and pretty and everything and get, like shady and do the things trees are supposed to do, well, they get all the nourishment. And all the other limbs that you're not going to keep, they get cut off and thrown away and burned up or whatever. And so as I was trimming trees yesterday, here's the thing, man. 2 years ago, in June, I started trimming my trees. I trim my trees every once in a while, like once a year, maybe. Now, I don't know because I didn't pay attention to my dad all the time. I don't know if that's when you're supposed to do it, but it always seems right, like when they need to be done. So I started doing it. But what happened last time is I had a heart attack. So, I was kind of standoffish about trimming trees. And because that was no fun. I mean, that wasn't exciting at all. But yesterday, because my trees were growing to the ground, I decided I'm going to trim the trees. Now, I took another lesson from my dad. I didn't put the ladder directly under the tree branch that I was trimming, because lessons from Dad are that that tree branch will take that ladder out. So I was very careful with the ladder, and I didn't have a chainsaw in the tree. I had the old school, rusty tree trimming. I don't even know what you call those things. You know what I'm talking about, the hook ones. Anyway, yeah, pruning shears. You know what those are? No, y'all are all electric and automatic, right? I'm old school. So I'm trimming trees, and I get finished, and I have more trees on the ground than I have in the air. And my wife's sitting in the swing watching me trim trees, to which I say, man, it'd be nice if somebody helped. To which she said, yeah, man, that'd be great. And she just sat in the swing and watched me trim trees, have a heart attack. I didn't have a heart attack, but what I found was when I finished, I got my trees up to where they need to be, right? I mean, you can drive under them, you can see the house under them. And Celia says, those are the ugliest trees I've ever seen. They're scrawny and they have no life to them. There's nothing. You took all of the pretty parts off. To which I said, if you're not going to keep it, you don't feed it. So as I was doing this, I was thinking, man, this looks like it's counterproductive to grow in a tree, right? But as I started processing this advice my dad had given me, I started seeing that God had shown me through this that not everything that looks good now is going to be good later. And I started looking at my life, and I started seeing all the places in my life had I pruned and cut away all of those things that seemed to be right at that time, that I didn't want to keep, but they were just for a season, but instead I kept them and kept feeding them. I didn't prune them and trim them. Then we got these trees out by the road, and they are tree from the top all the way to the ground. You see these big oak trees that just go to the ground, and they're ugly. And what happens in those trees is they don't produce the shade, because instead of growing out and big, they stay real skinny and ugly, you know, kind of like myself. No. These trees that aren't trimmed and aren't pruned and aren't taken care of, they don't produce, they don't turn out like we think of a tree being, like when we're drawing a picture of a big puffy tree and then a branch. They don't, they just go bleh. And that's the way our life starts to look. So as I was pruning these trees, I started to think, man, how much pruning is enough? What do our lives look like? What needs to be cut out of our lives to be healthy and to have the kind of life turn out that we really, really want? I mean, I want my life to be that perfect oak tree, right? Now, when those trees get huge and big, those branches are harder to cut out, trust me. You're not going to do it with pruning shears. You get the chainsaw and you get knocked out of the tree and you hobble around for the next few months. That's what happens when they get big and you try to trim them. The big logs are hard to trim. Sometimes those big things fall on your house. Sometimes they fall on your neighbor's house. Sometimes they fall on your car. Sometimes they fall on your fence. They become problematic because we didn't take care of them when they were small. But there's a reason, because it seems counterproductive to cut things out of our lives. Now, as Celia observed yesterday from my beautiful trees, that when we prune them, at first, they look scrawny and not like there's much there, and it seems like we're going in the wrong direction, right? And I found this out in my life. Whenever I started pruning the things out of my life, like toxic relationships. I remember I gave my life to God and I thought, wow, this is great. It's like fertilizer for the soul. You know, you're growing and everything's going to be good. But the truth was, some things needed to be pruned out of my life. Some things were not productive. Some things didn't contribute. Some things I was feeding that I wasn't going to keep. And so as I began to go through this, and I looked at these toxic relationships in my life that I had to prune out, and then I looked at some of these habits that I had, these things that I enjoyed, and I thought, this isn't contributing. These things I'm feeding aren't going to be kept later. And so I began to cut those out, and I cut these out. And what happened was I looked at my life, and it looked very scrawny and skinny and kind of ugly. And I was like, I've given up all of this stuff. And it's kind of like you get that feeling of like, man, what's the benefit? What's the trade-off? After pruning all of these things out of my life, what's the trade-off? What do I get? Well, it's not immediate. 2 years ago when I trimmed my trees, they looked scrawny and skinny. But this year they were so bushy and grown up that I had to actually pull the branches because they had all grown together and there's so many leaves. I was having to pull branches out. And in 2 years from now, when I trim trees again, it's going to be the same way because those trees are going to be bigger and more leaves and more fruit and more of the things that I really want. But trust me when I say this, I know how hard it is to prune our lives. I know how hard it is to change things and give up things and let things go that are comfortable and that have been there and that you see, and they're taking up all this space and time in our lives. And so it looks kind of, so you said, well, the tree was fine before. And I said, well, not really. It kind of looked like when you wake up in the morning. Like branches everywhere. No reason to rhyme to anything. Medusa. And it wasn't pretty, but it was bushy. It provided shade, just in all the wrong places. So, like that tree, I understand what it feels like when you have all this in our lives. I understand the fear and the hesitation and looking at it and saying, man, if I give my whole self to God, if I really come to the conclusion that there's a God, if I decide somewhere along the way that God is real, in that He really does love me and there is a better way to live, and if I get on board with that life and start to prune out the other things, man, it's going to get skinny and scrawny. It's going to look like not much going on. It's not instant. That's the problem with pruning, is we live in an instant results world. I hear people say all the time, I tried God for a month and nothing changed. You know, I tried God's way for a month and nothing changed. A lot of times you'll hear this, I tried giving my life to God and things got worse. How many of you experienced that? I bet the pruning isn't fun for the tree. Not the way I did it. Rusty shears, twisting, pulling. I don't think you're supposed to do that. I think it's supposed to be a clean cut. But hey, you work with what you got to work with, right? And when you got it by yourself and nobody will help you, they just want to swing and watch. That's all you can do. And it reminded me of that story in John 15, and that story where Jesus is having his last night with his closest friends, and as he's talking to them, they're like, just show us God. And he's telling, if you've been with me, you've been with God. He's in me and I'm in him, and he's here among us. And And they have this conversation, and so he's telling them that I'm only going to be here with you a while longer, and, believe in me, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father but by me. And he's having all this conversation, and then it says they leave, and they go to a garden. Now, it doesn't say this in John, but we know it says at the end of 14, it says that they left. And so in Matthew and other Gospels, you read that they end up in the Garden of Gethsemane. So in John 15, it picks straight up, and he starts telling this story. And he says this in John 15:1, I am the true vine. Now, I think Jesus was right in time with what's going on. I believe that when Jesus starts telling a story, we don't get the context a lot of times. I think as we're going through life, we'll read the Bible, and it's like, I know this verse or know that verse. I think, and this is just a personal opinion, you can take it or leave it, but those verse of the day calendars are killing us. I mean, because we have no context. We get a verse and, oh, that sounds good, but when you go read it, you're like, that's not even what that's talking about. Well, this is exactly what Jesus was in a place. He was walking into this beautiful garden. And so what's he start talking to them about? He looks as they're going through, and he's probably walking, and he probably does that with an untrimmed bush, and it slings back and hits Peter in the head. And it's dark, and it's slapping them, and they're like, what is going on? And he says, I'm the vine. Now, I don't know if it happened like that, but I know the context of the story is taking place in a garden. Okay, and so as he's coming, he's like, I'm the true vine. And my Father is the vine dresser. He's the one that trims the trees while I sit in the swing and watch. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches, and whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Here's what I noticed as I cut those tree limbs yesterday morning. When I came back yesterday afternoon in my pile, I'll tell you this, my pile of trees was bigger than the trees that were left. And what had happened is they had already withered. The leaves had already curled up, and it was just a matter of hours. Those things started to die. And then you kind of get what Jesus is saying. He's the true vine. He's the true tree. And when we are apart, disconnected from that tree, we're going to wither and we're going to die. Now, when we read this and we go, well, that's great, I got to be connected to the tree to produce fruit. That means, and here we go, churchy church. So we're going to start now. To produce fruit means you got to go out and Bible thump and start witnessing and acting all weird and yelling at people on the street corner and telling them they're going to hell and all this stuff. That's not it. Don't you want your life to produce fruit? I think that's the whole point of life. What is fruit? Well, this guy that writes the rest of the New Testament, he says fruit looks like peace and love, joy and goodness, self-control, gentleness, faithfulness. And when we look at life, we may say, man, I want a bunch of stuff, or I want to accomplish this, or I want to go there and see that, or do these things. But when we get down to it, we do all of these things we want to do, it doesn't really do it for us, does it? Because what we really want is peace and love. I don't know anybody that doesn't want more love. I've never met anybody that would say, I've got all the peace I can stand. I've never met anybody. I never met anybody that goes, there's just too much joy in that place. Never met anybody. That's what we want, right? We want more fruit. So Jesus says that those who remain attached to Him will produce fruit. That you can't do this apart from Him. And that's what we do is we try to attain the fruit apart from the tree. Now those branches I cut off, they are not going to produce. Actually, they're losing all the fruit that they had. All the leaves that they had have already fallen off. And pretty soon they're going to rot. And pretty soon I'm going to light them up. Because I like a good fire. And then he says, but to those branches that are producing fruit, I'm going to refine them. They need to be pruned too. Because the ones that produce fruit, I can make them produce more fruit. See, I have these branches that I kept, but they had all these little twigs all over them, millions of little twigs. And I don't want those twigs to become branches because they were pointing straight down. So I cut every twig off of every branch that was on the bottom side because I want the top sides to produce more fruit. Does that make sense? If you're not going to keep it, don't feed it. That's why I cut them. I'm not going to keep them. Why feed them? They're going to take away from the other ones. So we look at our lives and we say, first of all, am I attached? Am I attached to the true vine? Or am I trying to produce fruit while laying out here in this brush pile? It's a lot of work to produce fruit apart from the vine. You can do nothing. You can do nothing. But those that do produce fruit, once we commit to that, once we prune all of those other things out of our lives and we bite the bullet and we say, you know what I'm doing is not working. This stuff looks good and it looks green, but I'm trimming all of this. I'm stopping this lifestyle and I'm stopping that. I cannot hang out with these people who, I'm not saying my friends, man, I love my friends, but we were toxic together. Like their lives are probably better that they're not hanging out with me because it was a very toxic relationship. And when we were in those toxic relationships, we did things and we had a lifestyle and I had to break away from that, which left me very hurt and empty and wondering, what am I supposed to do without friends? Because it's not instant. You're not like, okay, I can't be with these people. I'm going to go be with these people. Well, it don't work that way. It takes time for a life change. You know, it takes time to happen. But as you start entering into this rest of God, you start feeding off of the tree and feeding off the branch. There's going to be things in our life that are going to be pruned off. See, that's the beauty, I believe the beauty of God is that He's never done with me. Like, I'm not as bad as I used to be, but I'm not as good as I'm going to be. I'm always being refined. I'm always being pruned. There are things that I don't care where you're... Now, you may have reached some level in that I haven't reached yet, but I keep thinking, man, I've got this. And then, hey, you got this ugly branch. You got this ugly branch. And if you're not going to keep it, you should stop feeding it. Here's another principle. Whatever you feed grows. There's some things that we're feeding that are growing that we don't want to feed, right? So as we start in this life change and we start in this move and God starts to refine us, then a lot of times we'll just say, you know what? I thought God loved me. I thought this was going to be easy. I think Solomon, supposedly the wisest man that ever lived, he came to this conclusion as he observed life. And I think his wisdom wasn't shocking, but it was authentic. Like, it was so real. And I think the wisest things in the world are the things that are obvious that we overlook. I think wisdom is just seeing things for exactly what they are. And as Solomon looked in his wisdom, he said, you know what? The rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. It seems to me that everybody has bad times. It seems to me that everybody has good times. It seems to me that everybody goes through cycles and seasons. That it doesn't matter how good or godly or how bad or evil, that everybody has this ebb and flow of life. Things happen to everybody. But see, the things that happen to those who are abiding, those who are attached, there's something else at work in there. There is a peace, a hope, a love, a faith that is deep inside of us that lets us stand through these storms. The branch attached to the tree can handle a lot more wind than the branch laying on the ground. Last week, man, our trampoline wasn't attached. And it is amazing how high a trampoline can go. I mean, they fly. They will fly. Branches have to be attached. They have to be attached, and then they're pruned, and they go through pruning just like the branches that we're not going to keep. But see, when we back up and look at the big picture, we start to see the fruit of the life we've always wanted. See, every day, day in and day out, I feel the pain and the suffering and the hurt and the disappointment of the pruning. And sometimes we get caught up in the pruning process and we never step back. As I was trimming those trees, I would cut a branch and then I'd walk way out in the driveway. I'd look at it and I'd be like, well, this branch here is going to continue to grow here, and that's going to grow over the house, so we don't want that one in the future. So we cut that one, and then that made my tree lopsided, so I had to come back and cut this one. I walk back and look, and then it's like, oh my gosh, I missed this. And then it's like, oh boy, that took out half the tree. I'm going to have to fix the other side. And so now I got Charlie Brown Christmas tree with the thing. Looks more like a palm tree. No, it's stepping back and looking and going, oh, see the big picture. This is the life I want. This is what's really going on here. See, we gotta take that breath and take that time and step back and go, man, I need to get rid of a few more branches here. I need to even things up to get the life I want in the future. I need to cut some more. I need to whittle away a little more. I need to fix a little of this and a little of that, adjust this and adjust that. And we keep refining, man. And one day we're going to back up and we're going to look and we're going to go, wow, you know, I'm actually living the life that I always wanted. My life is bearing the kind of fruit I want it to bear. And I want it to bear more fruit, so I stay in the process. Stay in the pruning process. Stay in it and stay in it and stick it out and tough it out, because life's coming at you. Whether you're trimming trees or not, heart attacks happen. Life's coming. But those attached to the vine, the true vine, those things don't take us out. Does that make sense? I thought as I was getting ready for today, and I thought about, advice that our parents give. Sometimes it's just about trimming trees. Sometimes the Savior of the world's walking through a garden and he's talking about bushes. Or sometimes he's just talking about something completely different that we're just not seeing. Sometimes I think as we look at these things in life, we may miss what's going on. We may look at our lives and go, man, my life is scrawny compared to what it was. It's not full and plush and got a lot of leaves on it. But you know, all that stuff was just for show because it was all worthless. It was all stuff that needed to go in the fire anyway. It was just for show. It had no fruit. It had no purpose. It was going to have no point. All those limbs ever did for me, because I'm the only one in my house that's over this tall, all they ever did for me was hit me in the face. Cut the branches off that hit you in the face. It's not hard trimming a tree. I trimmed the trees out here this week. Anybody see that? You know why? It hit me in the face when I walked by. So I got the saw out, I cut the tree down. No, when the branches hit you in the face, cut them off. It's not rocket science, but it is a better way to live. Does that make sense? All right, I want to pray for you, and then we're going to go eat lunch.